Well, hey, this is James Riley.
And Beth Riley.
And this is part of our Artist Spotlight podcast series. And we got a cool guest on the phone today.
Yeah, we have Ron Haney on the phone with us today.
From W.S. Holland's band. Ron, how you doing?
Doing great, James and Beth. It's so good to be with you guys, man. I've been looking forward to this.
Man, it's so exciting to have you on here. And, of course, 2020, just a weird year. I mean, to say the least. But how are you doing and also managing with this coronavirus situation?
Well, doing fine. No sickness in our immediate family or anything. I saw a Facebook post the other day. Someone said on New Year's Eve, I'm going to set up to midnight. Said not so much to see the new year come in, but just to make sure this old one goes out.
No.
So that's kind of where we are. But we're doing fantastic, man. Doing really well.
That's cool. Going to talk about this book. Actually, just got in the mail. Behind the Man in Black, the W.S. Holland story.
Yes.
Excited to jump into that.
Absolutely. The book is doing tremendously well. We're just so excited about it. It's taken several years to actually get it all written and put together and get it out. And not so much because it just took that much time to write it, but it took that much time because I'm so lazy. But we did get it out. June 29th was the release date. And it has been nothing but positive and good ever since we publicly released it, James. So we're very proud of it.
Can you give a bit of background on W.S. with Carl Perkins, then Johnny Cash?
Right. He started out with Carl Perkins in 1954. Now, they call him Fluke. That's his nickname. And it has nothing to do with being fluke instances in the music industry, although it would be a perfect reason to have that name, because he had no intention, Beth, of getting into the music business, had no intention of being a musician or anything related. He moved to a little community south of here. I'm in Jackson, Tennessee, so just about 10 miles south of here is a little town called Bemis. Fluke moved there with his mom after his father passed away in the year or two after that. And unbeknownst to him, the Carl Perkins family, them and their parents, moved just a matter of maybe a mile away from them. And as fate would have it, they met each other, and Fluke was actually in school with Clayton Perkins, who was the bass player, or became the bass player later. And so he became friends with Clayton, then he became friends with Carl and JB, and they had started playing nightclubs around this area. There was a bunch of nightclubs and so forth in our immediate area. So WS would go to those performances, and he said he would just go hang out, and for some reason, one night, he got up from his seat and walked up to what would normally be a bandstand. He said it was just a space in the corner back then. But he said the band was set up, and he said, I began to keep time with my hands on the curvature of Clayton's bass guitar, the big upright bass, doghouse bass.
Right.
And he said, I don't know why I did that. And he said, I'd never done it before. So after the gig, they were outside, and the boys were loading up and getting ready to leave in their car. And W.S. said he was just out there hanging around talking and visiting. And Carl Perkins said, W.S., we're going to Sun Records next Thursday. Why don't you borrow a set of drums and come with us? And he said, well, I could probably borrow some drums, but what would I want to borrow some for? I don't know how to play them. He said, well, you keep time on the curvature of that bass. You can learn to play drums. So long story short, that's what he did. He went to a guy he heard about here in Jackson and borrowed his set of drums. He didn't know the guy really, but he was a drummer here in the area. And he borrowed his drums, and that was on Saturday. He borrowed them on Sunday, took them home to his mom's house and set them up backwards because he didn't know how to set drums up. He's a natural left-handed, so he plays a right-handed kid left-handed or a left-handed kid right-handed. I don't know. He confuses me too. But that's what happened. And then on Thursday, they went to Memphis and had an appointment with Sam Phillips at Sun Records. And they went in and started setting their gear up. When Sam actually came in, they were sitting around in the floor just playing music. And they were playing a song that Carl had written when he was 14 years old called Movie Mag.
right?
Which short for movie magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about a guy that had a girlfriend he wanted to court named Maggie, and he wanted to take her to the movies on a horse or a mule called Becky. So that's what the song was about. And he said for some reason Sam Phillips liked the song, and that day they signed a recording contract. The first time they had ever got in the studio all together, signed a recording contract with Sam Phillips at Sun Records. And the rest, as they say, of course, is music history.
It's really neat music history.
Oh, I'm telling you, it's unbelievable. And he still just says, I just don't know what happened. It just all came about, So he was with Carl for about 6 years. After the Blue Suede Shoes and Matchbox and Honey Don't, those hits began to slow down somewhat. And Carl's dates and travel began to slow down. About 1959 and 1960, Johnny Cash called WS. They had met and toured together at Sun Records in the mid-50s. And he was needing a drummer. He said, I want to add a drummer. And he said, I know you can do what I need to have done. So it's another whole entire story I won't get into, but he went on a 2-week tour, and that 2-week tour turned into almost 40 years.
That's amazing.
It is, man. It is. He said later that he asked Carl, he said, Carl, now, we're just sitting here talking now. I said, let's look back when I first came to work for you, Carl Perkins. And he said, why did you ask me to go to Memphis for the audition and play drums? He said, well, WS, you were the only one that had a car that would make it that far. So he was driving a Cadillac, a 48 or a 49 Cadillac, I forget. And so that's the story he tells. I think it was more to it than that, but he went with John in 1960 and again was there for actually 37 years until John retired in October of 1997, retired from the road because of health issues.
It's amazing to think of all the big moments that WS was a part of, in rock history, country music history, even if he didn't realize it at the time. I remember him telling me that, he was more concerned about the getting paid for the session that turned out to be the $1 Million Quartet,
Absolutely. I think he said he made $11. That's when Sam started having to keep time for the musicians that he was working, and then he would pay them accordingly to the session time that they put in. And he said my cut was like $11. He said that's what I was concerned with that day, but it turned into, as you said, it became probably the most, or certainly one of the most famous recording sessions of all time was the $1 Million Quartet session with Elvis, Jerry Lee, Carl, and Johnny, and Flip was right there playing the drums.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if that was actually a session that they had set up ahead of time and not something that just sort of came together? I mean, it's still pretty amazing to hear the archives.
Well, it was, but it probably never would have worked as good if it had been planned.
That's true, though.
The only thing planned was the session. My understanding is, and I'll have to ask my friend Stan Perkins about this, but my understanding is when they went in the studio, they didn't even necessarily know what song they were going to do. I think Carl's father suggested that they do Matchbox, which is a song that Carl had put in the show. And I think that's where that came from. It was all so impromptu, James. It was unbelievable. But that's pretty much what happened. And, of course, it became the first follow-up after Blue Suede Shoes, which there again is another story all in itself.
Oh my gosh! Well, and of course, going from there to Johnny and all those amazing songs and performing for presidents and prisons, and is there a couple of memories that maybe even stand out? I mean, I know it's hard to look back over his entire career, and he probably can't just say one or two, but are there stories that maybe he talks about more than others, or?
Well, the $1 Million Quartet is the question that he gets asked probably as much as anything. They ask him, what was it like to be in the studio with all those superstars on December the 6th, 1955, I guess it was, 56. And he said, well, I wasn't in the studio with any superstars. We were just a bunch of guys trying to make music. So they all became superstars later. And then he tells a story about how it happened and everything. He said, Sam Sam Phillips had enough forethought that he called the photographer from the Memphis Press Senator newspaper, which was still in existence, after I came along. I remember it very well. And the guy came over and took all the pictures now that are the famous pictures of the $1 Million Quartet. But that's one of the stories that he gets asked about the most, and probably playing the Folsom prison shows would be another that they did that he gets a lot of questions about.
Very cool. Something to point out, the initials WS, it doesn't stand for anything, like any names or anything. It's just the letters WS.
That's exactly right, Beth. Back in those days, of course, he was born in 1935 in South Tillow, Tennessee. It's about an hour from here, right on the banks of the Tennessee River. And for some reason back in those days, it was fairly common for mothers and fathers to name their children an initial name. My maternal grandfather's name was ID, just like identification, but ID. And J.B. Perkins was the same way. Carl's brother that played with him guitar with the band.
Right.
And of course, you've got different people around out there. DJ Fontana had an initial name, although it actually stood for something, but WS's name doesn't stand for anything. He tells the story on stage and in interviews about his name. People ask him about that as well, and he says, well, my mother and daddy said he doesn't look too bright. Let's give him a name he can spell easy. So they named him WS, and that's it. And it doesn't even have periods after the letters. It's just WS Holland.
Well, that's one way to do it.
Get it done, won't it?
Exactly. Now, how did you and WS meet and start playing together?
Well, it was in 2008, because I had known about WS. I saw him perform live with Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, the Statler Brothers, the Carter family, the whole Cash troupe in 1969, the year that I graduated high school. As a matter of fact, it was right around the time of my graduation. And friends of mine and myself just impromptu one night said, let's go hear Johnny Cash. He's in town. So we did. He was at our Coliseum. And that's where I really started knowing about him and was really amazed at his playing and everything, and how he fit in with what they were doing, and how he really kept the time and set the pace. But many years later, I was playing guitar with Rayburn Anthony, which is a former Sun Records artist as well.
Right.
And it was a good friend of ours. He passed away just a couple of 3 years ago. But our keyboard player, Alan Gator Wheeler, and I were playing in Rayburn's band, and the drummer we had at the time was sick one Saturday night. We had a big gig up at a big family dance place not too far from here. So Rayburn called WS and asked him if he would come play. And he told him he would, so he did. Well, I kept noticing all night, looking back over my shoulder, which I always do. I watch the drummer and the other musicians, try to watch them, and so we can all do what we're doing and do it right.
Yeah.
And I kept noticing him. He would be playing, and he'd give me a thumbs up several times. I thought, well, at least I think I'm doing okay, because I knew who this guy was. He was a famous drummer and pioneer and all this kind of stuff, so a little bit of pressure there. But immediately following the show, he come down off the drum riser and walked over to me and extended his hand, and he said, man, I really like the way you play. And I thanked him, and I said, same to you. I said, I think we all did real well together, blah, blah, blah. And he said, there's only one thing wrong with it. And I thought, well, here it comes, And he said, it didn't happen 30 years ago. So from that moment in time on, guys, we became good friends, began to hang out. I began to produce some shows for some of the musicians he was working with himself at the time, and then that kind of fell apart. And the next thing we did, I told Fluke, I said, we need to put together a band. You need to be out on the road playing, and we need to go with you. So he said, well, what are we going to call the band? I said, we're going to call it the W.S. Holland Band. Why not? So that's how it all started. And so to here 12 years later, we're still doing it.
And that's so cool. I had the pleasure of being around you guys, getting introduced a few times at some festivals and stuff, and
absolutely
love hearing those stories. Never get tired of it. And for people that want to hear these stories, there's also a new CD project, My Life on the Road with Johnny Cash, the first 20 years.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about that. I'm sure there's lots of crazy stories there.
That's what we call a spoken word project.
Yeah.
And actually, at this particular time in history, it's not on CD. It's on MP3.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Now we're kicking around the idea of putting it on CDs and making it commercially available because we've had requests for that. We've been selling it for, this year. And it came out before the book did, so it was already in circulation. But it has a lot of different stories and everything. It's WS telling those stories, actually in his voice, telling the stories. So it's kind of like what I would call an audio book, although there's not a printed book to go with that. The other book is totally different. But you're exactly right. My Life on the Road with Johnny Cash, the first 20 years, we had a distributor that used to be distributed our stuff back a few years ago, and she suggested we do a spoken word project. She had done one with her company with George Harrison of the Beatles' sister about George, and she said it was very popular. And so we need to do it. So we did. We did put it together, and it's WS and myself, and I'm basically interviewing him and asking him about these stories and these events in his life and career. And that's how it came about. It's really a great project, and we've gotten such tremendous feedback from people that actually get to sit there and hear him in his own words, in his own voice, tell these stories that have really become famous in music circles.
I love his storytelling, and even just looking at this book and first chapter talking about really that last show they played together and how Johnny lit up. Yeah. And the book, of course, I'm talking about Behind the Man in Black, the W.S. Holland story. Exactly. Available now at wsflukeholland.com.
Exactly.
But I mean, I love just his storytelling and his view on things.
Right.
You mentioned, was this book in the works for a while?
It was. It's taken us a while, and I say taken us, it's taken me a while to get it all put together. That fell under my opportunity to do. And how it came about, we talk about it in the book. Joyce Holland, W.S.'s wife, asked me one night, said, we need to write a book, or you need to write a book. And I said, write a book? I've never written a book. She said, well, you need to. She said, you're hearing all these stories that W.S. is telling, and you're the one to do it. So the more I thought about it, I liked the idea of having a book that would document, these stories and a lot of these stories. So I began to toy with it and began to work with it and began to actually set time aside to write. And you're talking about listening to all these stories. He tells me time and time again, even today, he said, I know you get tired of hearing all these same stories. And I said, no, man, keep them coming because I want to get them embedded in my brain. I want to know them. They need to be preserved. So we have quite a few archive recordings of things that we've done to where he's telling these types of stories and so forth. And that's exactly how the book came about. We decided to put it out in print form, and I'd love to do an audio version, but that'd be a pretty heavy undertaking, but we may can do something similar to that as time goes by. But people are really responding in spectacular ways to the book, and we're very happy about that.
Well, it's important to archive these stories because we're never going to see a time like this again with the Sun Records days and of course Johnny being a part of that and then spending nearly 40 years with Johnny and we'll never see another artist like Johnny Cash. Just so well loved like that. It's just an innocent time. I remember one of the things WS talking about was the bass drum where he would make that his suitcase. I mean, if you look close on the, I think it was at the Johnny Cash Museum when I saw it at the time, but the a zipper on there where that was his suitcase, and because they didn't have enough room for everything.
Exactly.
But
that's the drums that they actually used in Sun Records studio to record Blue Suede Shoes.
That is just unreal.
Those drums are now, by the way, James, at Graceland.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah,
Right here in Memphis.
There's a Marty Stewart exhibit, and Marty called and said he would like to have the drums in the exhibit. So here a couple of years ago, we went down there and they did the presentation and opened Marty's exhibit. Marty Stewart has probably the world's biggest collection of country music memorabilia.
Sure.
But that's where the drums are. And W said there was no room in the car for suitcases. So they had to be innovative. And he got the idea and went to a local auto upholsterer here in town, and they cut a half moon cut in the bass drum, put in a big zipper. So he would he would carry his dirty clothes home, his laundry, in that bass drum, and that's an actual fact. They did it that way because with a full size doghouse bass, 2 guitars, an amplifier, 4 or 5 people in the car. This wasn't a van. It wasn't an SUV back then. It certainly wasn't a bus. They all had to get in there with their clothes and with their instruments. So they had to be pretty innovative as to how they how they carried everything around. And that he came up with the idea. WS is very inventive anyway. He has an inventive mind.
So what is on the horizon for you or WS, either one of you guys?
Well, right now we're trying to ride this book and get it out as much as we can. We're kicking around the idea of also having it on Amazon. For this reason, they have so many websites around the world. They have their domestic and their international sites. And it would just make it easier because we've had a ton of orders, people wanting the book in Europe, Canada, and basically around the world, Beth. So we're hoping to do that here real soon. As a matter of fact, I've actually started work toward getting it listed on Amazon. So the book is the main thing right now. We're still promoting the spoken word project of him telling the stories and so forth. We have no plans right now to do any music recording, although that could come up at any time. So that's pretty much where we are right now, and hoping that we can really get the word out about the book, because just by promoting it on Facebook primarily, it has really taken off. So I know that if we get either a distributor or someone like Amazon that will push the book to some degree, it will do a lot better. So the book is what we're focusing on right now.
So the book is available at wsflukeholland.com, behind the Man in Black, the W.S. Holland story, and of course also the spoken word project, My Life on the Road with Johnny Cash, the first 20 years. Yes. This is pretty exciting, and Ron, I really appreciate you coming on here and telling us about this stuff. It's a pretty iconic time in music history. Thank you, James and Beth. This is just such a blessing to us to be able to be on with you guys. We thank a lot of you guys. We haven't ever met Beth in person. We're going to one of these days. One day. One day, girl. But we know about your work and know that you guys have done so well, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be your friends. Well, we appreciate you taking the time out to talk to us today. You bet.